different ways of defining species, but they're part of one family, right? Now, before human beings, there may have been other things which existed. That's a possibility, Islamic. It doesn't contradict Islam. So they could have been like Homo naledi, something like that, or Homo erectus, or Denisovans, or whatever. So there's a lot of unclarity. It's not clear. We as Muslims can't say, okay, this is what definitely happened. There are things we can be clear about. For example, all human beings today coming back to an ancestral couple. But other than that, a lot of other things, we can't make those sweeping general statements. It's actually quite difficult to do that. And when people do that, when you ask them for evidence, it's quite difficult for them to provide that evidence. And what you realize is they just basically made an inference most of the time. Yes?
Just a question regarding the picture on the screen. Perhaps a lot of people have this question, but we know that Darwinian evolution, as you said, the mechanism was natural selection. So it's more of a survival of the fittest. If you've got the best genes, then pass them on to the next generation, and the ones who fail to possess these ones die out. So that creates, it's like capitalism. But my question is as follows: is that what does Darwinian evolution or evolution in general say to, for example, the three in the middle? Because now there are monkeys and there are humans. But why is it that there are monkeys and not these ones in the middle, if these progressing creatures are supposed to be better than the prior generation?
So look, again we go back to the question of progression. Yeah, better. This is a big discussion in the biological community, and there's a big misconception about, okay, there is one sense in which, okay, things exist today, so they must be better in some sense to the things that don't exist. But this thing about, okay, so clearly the one human-like creature at the end that's more evolved than the others, and some people have said things like, well, if human beings evolved from monkeys, then why do monkeys exist? But that would be a misunderstanding, because the theory doesn't say human beings evolved from monkeys. It says human beings and chimpanzees and other primates, going back, they have a common ancestor. And the supposed split, which is some 6-7 million years ago, in between that and now, if you imagine, we would need millions of transitional fossils, right? But fossilization is very rare. It's like lightning hitting an area. So getting into this sort of discussion, you automatically start to unravel some of the assumptions which are made, which assumptions are based upon the public understanding of Darwin's theory. What I like to focus on more is why are we even discussing this, and why, for example, aren't like 50 people or 100 people here coming over and listening to a talk about string theory and atheism, right? Why are we speaking about Darwin's theory and atheism? So the crux of the issue is not even these biological nuances or these discussions about progression and fossils and all the rest. The crux of the issue is really about the existence of God and whether this theory disproves God. Everything else is, if you like, the side dish. And I think that's how I would summarize what I'm trying to convey. Yes?
So in terms of the nature of science, we know that it has to heavily rely on induction. From your own study of this field, would it be fair to say that Darwinism is the best explanation within science for human existence, or are there other evolutionary theories that have a greater weight?
Okay, that's a good question. So the first point is that science, apart from the thing which I've discussed, is, and actually no, I did mention it briefly, was methodological naturalism is also part of that. So based on methodological naturalism, if we were to infer theories and were to look at theories in the context of science, what we need to understand is that science functions, although it's not meant to, more like a democratic system. So if you were to ask who is the Prime Minister of the UK, you'd say Theresa May. You wouldn't say who is best suited to be the Prime Minister of the UK. I'm not saying she's not. Just saying that's just the truth, the fact that she is the Prime Minister of the UK. Likewise, in science, if someone says, what is the best theory? I mean, there's many different ways you can cut the onion, but I would just say the best theory in any field is what's the most popular, because that's just the way that science works, right? So from that definition, we would say Darwinism. Darwinism is the prevalent idea, the prevalent paradigm, and what I'm trying to convey is prevalent paradigms don't translate to truth, regardless whether they're in evolutionary biology or something else. Because I think some Muslims have difficulty in even accepting Darwin's theory as being science. And I think that's just not rational, because you can't defend that. And there isn't a need to make that argument, but I think it's just kind of like an overreaction, saying, you know, and I've heard this before, where some people are like, look, let's not even accept it as a theory, and let's propose something like intelligent design, right, as a rival. Now, I've spoken out against intelligent design because I believe that methodological naturalism doesn't allow that. Fair enough. I mean, Scott Todd, he's an evolutionary biologist, and he summarizes it really well. He says, if all of the data points to an intelligent designer, such a hypothesis is not accepted in science because it's not naturalistic. And I agree with him. Because in science, you can only accept things according to the paradigm of methodological naturalism. Yes?
Jazakallah khair for this talk. And I appreciate that the main critic, I understand, is the instrumentalization of Darwinism, of the theory, how it was instrumentalized politically for whatever reason. So what is your thought on theistic evolution?
Theistic evolution? Well, the thing is, theistic evolution means many different things, right? So there's one aspect of theistic evolution which Muslims wouldn't really have a problem with, or Christians, or whatever, which is known before Darwin, that, you know, you do have branching out, you do have evolution taking place, you do have this. But if you mean theistic evolution in the sense that you have a cell, the first cell, which evolved into all life forms, and it happened via natural selection, but people explain it within the theistic paradigm. Asa Gray, who was a friend of Darwin, and they were contemporaries and they were exchanging letters and stuff, he was a biologist or whatever up in Harvard or one of these American universities, and Darwin was in the UK. He was a theistic evolutionist. So it's coherent, it makes sense as a system. Do I subscribe to that type of theistic evolution? I don't. But if someone was to, anything makes more sense for me than atheism. So yeah, I would say yeah, theistic evolution, if somebody was to subscribe to that, you know, that would make more sense than the idea that you have atheistic evolution, if you want to call it that, it's all mechanical and it's all blind. Because I do think when it comes to this topic, there's too much focus on, you know, human chimpanzee ancestry or ethics or this or that or social Darwinism, whatever. The crux of the issue is the existence of God, and whether this theory disproves the existence of God or it doesn't. I think that's the crux of the matter. And once we deal with that, everything else is, you know, not that important. Yes?
What does Islam say about the age of the earth itself?
Yep.
Does that contradict Darwin's theory of evolution?
Okay, so that's a good question. And again, this is related to what somebody asked me. So some convert to Islam from Christianity a few months ago, no, 2 years ago in fact, he came up to me and looked really, really worried, and he said, you know, we believe the earth is 6,000 years old, so, you know, how were the other things happening before this? And I explained to him, sorry bro, you know, we don't believe that. Because he used to be a Christian and a certain type of Christian, he assumed that that's what Muslims believe. And that's not a belief that's held by all Christians. That's just a belief that's held by some Christians in North America. And so we as Muslims, we don't have a date. We don't have a time. We don't have 50,000 years, 100,000 years, 6,000 years. We don't have that. We don't have anything in our theology or our history which says this is the age of the earth, this is the age of man, this is when the earth is going to end. Because there's people working out the end of the earth, the end of the world, you know, Armageddon, Malhama, whatever it is. They're working out the dates using like narrations of the Prophet and stuff. You can't do stuff like that. We don't have those things, right? And a lot of people make those inferences, and other people hear that and they think those inferences are what the scriptures say. But it's not. Those are inferences. There's another question somewhere here. Yeah, there, sorry.
Hi, thank you for the talk. First of all, does Islam have an explanation of Homo erectus and Homo neanderthals? I guess that's based on my question of yours. These individuals, fair enough, they may have died off, but they were, well, we know that Homo neanderthals had quite a rich culture, including art and stuff. Definitely my best. This is a very interest of mine. As well as the fact that if we come from the perspective that Allah created these species, did he just need something to practice on before he had us, basically?
No, because look, we don't have a problem with Neanderthals or Denisovans or Homo naledi or Homo erectus. So again, you know, the idea that look, all of life, all of the earth is only really for human beings, right? You know, anything else that may have come may have been some sort of prototype which wasn't really needed and then it died out. So we don't really have that. If there's things which existed before Homo sapiens, which could have been different to Homo sapiens or similar, and what we used to think about the Neanderthals was that they were like brutes and they were like, you know, ruffians, but now we've started to discover actually they have a rich culture, like you say, and they have loads of things going on. So axiomatically we don't have a problem. I mean, they could have lived, they could have died out, whatever reason they existed, we don't know. We don't have a problem with any other, because there's, I'm not sure exactly, but there's something like 17 different types of potential human species which were different to Homo sapiens. So even if there wasn't 17, even if there's like 1,000 different types which existed at different periods and died out, we don't have a problem with that. And again, someone can ask another question to your question, which is, what is Islam's view on the idea that, you know, certain groups of people alive today share genetic data with Neanderthals, you know. So, you know, were they part of that family too? Again, these are not the sort of things where I can give you a clear-cut argument and say, okay, this is what Islam says. What I can say is that there are various possibilities, and none of those possibilities contradict the fundamental pillars of our worldview. I hope that makes sense, right? So I'm not making like, you know, because sometimes when you have somebody speaking about this topic, they say, right, I'm going to draw the line here. This is when the first human came. This is what we consider to be a human. This is what we don't consider to be a human. And this is what we believe could have happened and nothing else could have happened like that. I'm not making those inferences because I don't think I can make those inferences. I don't think anybody can make those inferences. What I can do is make other inferences which are clear. So one of the ones which is clear is that all the human beings alive today go back to an ancestral couple, right? So that's an inference that I can make. Another inference that I can make is that Islam's view about the purpose of life and the existence of life fundamentally contradicts that which say a philosophical naturalist infers from Darwin's theory of saying human existence is purely for survival and reproduction. Those types of things, we can make clear-cut arguments and say, no, that really contradicts Islam and that doesn't make sense. Other things, I can't make those calls. Those things are actually quite difficult to do.
Thank you. Do you mind if I ask the second question?
Yeah, of course.
On your slide where it showed the bats and the wings and stuff like that,
yep.
Why didn't you use pictures of the bone structure? I think it shares a lot more similarity compared to this.
Yeah, I can use that.
I'm just saying, like, fair enough, these animals are very different, but you were suggesting that there's, I don't remember the wording correctly, but you were saying that there's on a surface level, I think, if I remember correctly.
No, what I was trying to get to is that whether you look at a biochemical level, a anatomical level, or a linguistic, or whatever, whatever layer you look at, you have what's known as homoplasy, which is similarities which are not due to common ancestry. So I could have made that into a images which were just bone structures, or I could have made that into DNA sequences, it wouldn't really make a difference. The fundamental point I was trying to get to is that we have what's known as homoplasy, which is similarities at different levels which are not due to common ancestry.
Thank you very much.
I think somebody, was it? Hey, I'll go with you because you already asked. Yes?
Thank you for the talk. I just wanted to ask, do we as Muslims believe that Adam and Eve are actually Homo sapiens? That they could have been Neanderthals, that then from their ancestors become, their offsprings have become Homo sapiens. We don't know for sure that humans were fully evolved as they were created at the start. And I think I wanted to put in from someone who asked the question.
Okay, let me answer that first, then we'll...
Yeah, I just wanted to say, in terms of why we weren't fully evolved at the start, because if we were fully potent, we would become other gods.
Sorry, I didn't hear that?
You said humans, why weren't we created fully evolved?
No, what I was saying was that the idea of fully evolved is based on goals, and that's not the way that evolution works.
Yeah. Although, can you answer the first question?
Okay, so your first question was
Do we know,
about so the thing is, look, we as human beings today, our ancestors going back, we were all, if you want to call us Homo sapiens, going back to Adam and Eve. You can make that. That's not an issue. Now, human beings, our genetic traits and also our anatomical traits, they are affected by where we live, and they're products, not completely, but they are products of geographical distribution. So we have different types of evolution going on in terms of human species all across the world, right? So those things are happening. Now, again, we're getting into those sort of questions which are kind of new, that in the sense that they don't disprove Islam, and it doesn't prove atheism, it doesn't get to the crux of the issue. The crux of the issue is, why would somebody accept the idea which Islam proposes that Adam and Eve existed, which is unscientific, which makes no sense from a methodological naturalistic point of view, or another point, which is that Islam believes that Jesus, he was born to a virgin, which from a scientific perspective is nonsense, doesn't make any sense, or why Muslims believe that Moses struck his staff and the sea parted. Again, from a methodological naturalistic point of view, complete nonsense, doesn't make any sense. And the answer is because we have a belief in God. That if there is no God, then everything has to be explained naturalistically. The virgin birth is impossible, the miracle of Moses is impossible, Adam and Eve is impossible. But if God does exist, then all of those things are possibilities. But then the next question is, how do we know that happened? And for us to make that argument, we need to make an argument for why we believe Islam is true. However, it all goes back to that fundamental point of the existence of God. Because somebody can turn around and say, do you know what? Fair enough, Darwin's theory, it's got these issues. Fair enough, it's been misused. Fair enough, it's got this. But from a methodological, naturalistic point of view, isn't it the best example? Isn't it true that the Islamic narrative has no scientific basis, in the sense that it doesn't fit in methodological naturalism? I'll say yes. Isn't it true that Darwin's mechanism does? Say yes. Okay, so somebody will say, why would you choose one over the other? So I'd make 2 points here. The first point I'd make is there's a false dichotomy, because no one is saying in the scientific community that Darwin's theory is absolutely true and is literally true. So it's a false thing to pit religion versus science. But on a second level, there is a question that they're asking which is different to the first one. And their question is, well, why would you still accept religious miracles as opposed to taking naturalistic understandings of every type of phenomenon, right? And that's where the question really gets down to, well, do you believe in God or not? Because if you believe in God, then those types of things are possible. If you don't, then there has to be a naturalistic understanding. Therefore, when you really get to the crux of the issue, when it comes to Darwinism and Islam, it's not got to do with biology. It's got to do with your first principles, whether you begin off with the existence of God or you deny the existence of God. And that dictates the lenses by which you look at the rest of the data.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I'm more focused about the origin of us as humans. And I think someone else has said about theistic evolution.
Yep.
Said you do not accept this as a concept. Right? Still don't understand why both science and Islamic can coexist.
Again, for someone to say that they can't coexist assumes that there's a contradiction. Yeah. Now, the contradiction is not that there's something in Islam and there's something in science and they contradict. That's another separate discussion. The real issue is that there's those people who are saying science is giving us facts. They're giving us things which are absolutely true, right? And then religion's making these claims, right? So therefore, they're both going to contradict each other. What I'm doing here is I'm saying the ones who are making this claim, they're giving you a popular understanding of science, which is not the academic understanding. Because even if you do not believe in God, the idea that these scientific theories, which are pushed out as facts, you can challenge those using just the philosophy of science. You don't even have to have a religious conviction to say, look, we're not going to accept this theory to be literally true. Right? We just accept it to be a working model. The false dichotomy is that the narrative which is given is, look, science has given us facts and religion has given us fiction, so therefore we should choose facts over fictions. And I'm challenging, I'm not answering the question. It's like someone asks you, when did you stop being your wife? Yeah? No matter which way you answer it, you're done for. So you can't answer the question, you have to challenge the question. So that's what I'm doing here. When there's a science, but science is against Islam, right? Someone says, why would you choose fictitious religion over factual science? I'm not going to answer the question, I'm going to challenge the question first. And I think this is very important because fundamentally I believe there's different levels of misunderstandings between the public and the academic side of things. So for example, science is seen as a process or a methodology which would lead people away from God, right? However, historically it's the other way around. Because the modern scientific method, which doesn't go back to Galileo or Newton, it actually goes back to Hassan ibn Haytham 1,000 years ago, who was a Quranic scholar. The very scientific methodology that he devised, which we use up to this day, which was very different to the proto-science that the Greeks were doing before him, he said, I am doing science because I want to become closer to God. Because he saw that science was trying to discover the how, and he was trying, and Islam gives you the why. These are two different things which don't contradict each other, the how and the why. So the fundamental issues here are not fundamentally to do with dates or times or how you define Homo sapiens or how you do this. It's fundamentally to do with whether we believe in God or not, or and how that paints the way that we look at the rest of the data. Because it's about lenses. If you have blue lenses on, you're just going to see blue. If you have red lenses on, you're just going to see red. But if you take them off, you're going to see all different types of them.
I guess what I was trying to get at is we can't still use science as the how to explain what happened during this, with what we really understand. So
We can use it as an attempt of how, but remember that how isn't written in stone. Yeah. Yes.
So Karl Popper, in his book Logical Scientific Discovery, he said that the demarcation between science and pseudoscience is falsification. So what's interesting with what you said is that Darwinism is a valid theory within the scientific framework. So what is the method by which it allows for falsification?
Okay, so that's a really good question. The issue with that is that falsification, which was a very popular view in science, in philosophy of science, has now been superseded. So now, although even